Welcome to Candid Catholic Convos, a program brought to you by the Catholic Diocese of Harrisburg. Our mission is to humanize the church and help you to grow in your faith, love, and understanding. I'm your host, Rachel Trochet, a cradle Catholic who's only human and struggled with faith on more than one occasion. Each week, you'll hear engaging, down-to-earth interviews and actionable strategies you can implement into your life with ease to help you grow closer to God. If you're ready to open your heart and step fully into the person God created you to be, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Candid Catholic Convos. This past weekend, my kids and I got to talking. We started daydreaming about all the fun things we're going to do this summer, all the things we want to do with Daddy when he comes home from his army training, and that ever-evolving question, what do you want to be when you grow up? The answers I got were pretty typical for an 8, 6.5, and 5-year-old. My oldest wants to be a police officer and a soldier in the army like Daddy. My middle child wants to be a professional wrestler. And my youngest, this one's new, wants to be a gym teacher. I always thought vocation was synonymous with job, used interchangeably. But it turns out a vocation carries a much deeper significance, more who you are and not just what you do. Or better still, not just what you want to be when you grow up, but who does God call you to be? It's fitting that we're talking about this on Pentecost Sunday, because on the first Pentecost, the apostles were no longer just fishermen or tax collectors. They were called to preach the word of God, just like the 11 seminarians in formation for the priesthood in our diocese. But how do we know if the path we're on is the right one? How do we know if we're being called? Father Josh Weaver, Director of Vocations for the Diocese of Harrisburg, joins me today to walk through what it means to discern a vocation and how you can support someone in your life who feels called to this special service. Father Weaver, thank you so much for joining us today on Candid Catholic Convos. I'm really excited to talk to you today and to really dive into this topic of vocations. So I guess appropriately to start, could you tell me about your role in the diocese as Director of Vocations? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's actually been one of the more complicated questions to answer for people because they haven't exactly found a super succinct way to describe everything that's involved with the position. But I guess if I had to try to just distill it down, I would say my role is to help especially young men and young women discern what God is calling them to do with their life. And in a particular way, if there's the possibility that God is calling them to the priesthood or the religious life in some way, to be able to direct them and guide them to discern that properly and then take the proper steps in order to actually pursue God's will for them, in their life. But it also extends to, visiting different schools or groups and just kind of promoting awareness that God still is calling people to serve in this capacity. So yes, it's the one-on-one interactions with people, which is certainly life-giving and awesome, but it's also on a macro level too, where working with institutions and promoting awareness and just a whole culture of vocations really in the Diocese of Harrisburg. So both on the individual level and kind of in the bigger group level.
So what exactly is a vocation? Are there different types of religious vocations?
Yeah, so we use the word vocation a lot. In a nutshell, a vocation is a calling, and it's a calling from God. So often I'll visit the different schools and sometimes people will say, oh, it's like what you want to do with your life. And I love when they ask that because they're on the right track, but not exactly. It's not what we want to do with our life, but rather what has God called us to do? Or rather, not even just what has he called us to do, but really who has he called us to be for our life. So ultimately, our vocation is God's calling in our life. And there are 4 main types of vocations. There's, of course, the married vocation, which a majority of people are called to. There's the priesthood. There's the religious life. And there's the consecrated or generous single life. And so those are the 4 types of vocations. But all that falls under the overarching vocation or calling that we all have, which is to holiness, which is, of course, the most important one, because it's great that you may be a priest, but if you're not a holy priest, not good. That may be awesome that you're enjoying the marriage vocation, but if you're not a holy couple, not good. That we're all called, no matter what we're called to do, to be holy. But then those other vocations are really how are we called to live out that universal vocation to holiness.
That's fascinating. So talk to me a little bit about what your journey to becoming a priest was like. How did you know this is what you were meant to do?
Yeah, I would love to say that there was just like one moment and it was super clear to me that this is what needed to happen. But at least with me, God was pretty patient. He led me through, years, honestly, to get to the point where I made that decision. I would say that probably the first and most important moment of my life was actually in high school, where I was on my senior retreat. And I just remember thinking, like, all this Jesus stuff that I've been learning about in religion class, that I've been learning about at Mass or in my home, it's either real or it's not. And if it's real, then it's like the most important thing ever, that God really became one of us, died and rose again from the dead for us. If that's real, that's like the most important thing ever. Or it's not real, and like he's just some guy who had his philosophy about life. It got him killed and he stayed dead just like everybody else. And so either this whole, Jesus thing is the most important thing in human history and in my life, or it's of no importance whatsoever. The faith just can't be moderately important. And so I really wrestled with that question. Do I really believe it? Because if I really believe it, then my life needs to reflect that. And so it was when I was a senior in high school that I decided that I really believed this and that I was going to give my life over to God. And honestly, the prayer I made was just, Lord, show me your will for my life and give me the courage to follow it. I had no idea that priesthood was on the horizon. It literally wasn't even a thought. But that was the first moment, because that's when I decided that I was going to follow Christ, regardless of where he would end up calling me. And then it was when I went to college that my call started to become more obvious to me. I was dating at the time, and that was a really awesome relationship. But as we got closer, the more I realized that God was starting to put that idea of priesthood on my heart. Eventually it got to the point where I knew that I would never know if God was calling me to be a priest until I entered seminary and kind of like looked behind that curtain, so to speak. And I also knew that at the end of the day, God's going to ask me one question. He's going to ask me, did you give me everything? He's not going to ask me like how successful I was or anything like that. He's going to say, did you give me everything? And I knew that for me, my everything was to give up, my dreams of what I was studying, to give up my dreams of being, a biological father and a husband, and to see if he was calling me to be a priest. And so then, obviously broke up with the girlfriend and applied to seminary, was accepted, and began that journey. But even then, being in seminary, like I didn't have it all down. That was 6 years of unpacking and discerning and sifting through all sorts of stuff. And over time, I realized, okay, this is actually what God is calling me to do. I'm ready to commit. So it wasn't a one and done thing. It really happened patiently and in stages. St. Paul had a pretty powerful experience. So God certainly can speak very loudly and very clearly all in a moment. It's not how he did it for me. And I would say by and large with people, he doesn't go that route. He certainly can. But for most people, one of the trademarks of really kind of like testing that vocation or discerning it is to see if it's persistent, if it carries over a long time, or if it's something that was just like a fleeting thought or an idea. So can God act in a very powerful way in a moment? Sure. And I'm sure you could find priests where it became pretty clear to them. It's not what happened with me. And by and large, it's more of a gradual process for most people, I would say.
Gotcha. Tell me a little bit about the typical path for becoming a priest or a religious sister. I mean, is that even a fair question? Is there a typical path?
Yeah, I'm not sure there is. I think everyone's path is completely unique, and that's the beauty of it, because every person that the priest or religious is called to meet is unique. So I have priest friends who entered later in life, some that entered right out of high school. There are some that were homeschooled, some that went to private school or to public school. There were those that are highly educated and those who maybe weren't educated much at all before. You have some from big families, some that were only children. You have priests and religious from all sorts of backgrounds in any way you can cut it. And I think that just shows, the beauty of God, because we're all called to reach out to people. And so someone that I may be able to naturally connect with because of my past or my interests or my personality, like another priest may not be able to connect with in the same way, but then also someone that he can reach out to, he can probably connect with in a way that I wouldn't necessarily have the best skill set to. So God calls us when he calls us for his reasons. And we start to see that, I think, over the course of our ministry. And I'm sure in heaven we'll see just exactly, what he was thinking when he called us. Sometimes I question what he was thinking when he called me, but here we are.
I know having support in whatever career or role you choose in life is super important, but I'm assuming it must be even more important for something as life-changing as this role is.
I think it's extremely important. Following God's will is hard in general. It's even harder when people are opposing you. Now, can that make you stronger and actually strengthen your call and strengthen your resolve? Yes, because at the end of the day, God is stronger than anybody else. But having encouragement is super important. Because sometimes we don't see ourselves accurately, right? We see ourselves maybe through rose-colored glasses and we think we're maybe stronger than we are and we are blind to our weaknesses, or we have the opposite problem and all we see is our weaknesses and we don't see any of our strengths. And so having outside perspectives of people who see us objectively to say, you know what, I think you could make a great priest or you'd make a good religious or whatever, can sometimes just get the ball rolling because you think, wait, this is possible for me. God could actually be calling me to this. Other people see qualities in me that I could live this out well and in a happy and holy way. Maybe God is calling me. Maybe I need to ask him and inquire and discern. And then what God does with the individual, that's his call. But sometimes our encouragement just helps us to be open to whatever God is asking. And so I think encouragement is super helpful and super important.
We've talked a lot about discerning or discernment. What exactly does it mean to discern?
Yeah, the word discern, ultimately, it comes from the Latin word meaning to sift through. So you're trying to sift through the voices, the feelings, the quote unquote signs that you're getting, because you may have an inclination to something, but you have to ask yourself, okay, is this the voice of God in my life? Is this the voice of the evil one in my life? Is this the voice of the world trying to get me to focus on worldly things rather than heavenly things? Or is it my own internal voice and it's just what I want? And it could be any of those. And so discernment is about sifting through to say, this is what I got. This is what's going on in my life. These are the different data points, if you want to think of it like that. And I have to sift through and figure out, what's the source of these? Are they from the evil one? Are they from God? Are they from myself or the world? And that takes time, which is why we brought that up before, that first of all, you have to learn how to discern. You have to learn what God's voice sounds like, in your life. And so all of that takes time. That's why having a spiritual director is also really important. Someone who has been doing this a lot longer than you have and had a lot of experience that can help teach you and form you to be more attentive to God's voice in your life. And that's why everyone who's in formation, whether it be seminary or religious life, has a spiritual director or directress to help them do just that. And when you enter seminary or religious formation, it's not like signing your life away. It's just entering into the next stage, or a more serious or more intentional stage of discernment of, is God calling me to this? And you get one-on-one help with that, where you may not have that in just the regular outside world. So it's intentional time spent to really look closely. Is God calling me to this? So discernment is ultimately about sifting through, finding out the source of these, quote unquote voices, feelings, inclinations, and seeing what's from God and what's not. And then whatever is from God, we follow that.
So what kind of advice would you give to a young person discerning religious life? Let's say somebody just walked into your office today and said, this is what I want to do. What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, the first is I think we should all discern it to some degree, because God does call young people to serve him as priests and religious. And we're all called to discern, God, are you calling me to this? Now, how seriously one has to discern that, I think, differs. Some people don't have to discern too long. God makes it pretty clear to them. Some need to take intentional time to discern. Some need to go into seminary or into a religious order. And even then they may still be called out, but God does call each of us to discern it. How far into it we go is on a case-by-case basis. But just some advice, I guess the first thing I'd say is God can't drive a parked car. I forget exactly where I heard that, but I really liked that we do have to actually move. We can only get so far in thinking about it and praying about it. Eventually, we have to, talk to somebody about it. Maybe someone who's actually living that life would be a good start. We have to obtain more information about it because you can't make a good decision or a good discernment with bad or incomplete information. So we have to start learning more. Maybe that's in reading books. Maybe that's in taking visits to places. At the end of June every year, we have our Quo Vadis Days retreat, which is literally geared for young men to set aside about a week or so of their summer to just really grow closer to the Lord, but also to get a better idea of what priestly life is like, what it's like to be a seminarian, so they can have a better sense of whether or not this is for me. So stuff like that. You can't drive a parked car. We have to eventually take some movement. Otherwise, we're always just going to kind of wonder. But then I'd also say like prayer and living a sacramental life is essential. That there's no way to know what God is asking of us if we don't actually talk to him and we don't actually listen to him. So setting aside that time regularly to spend that time in prayer, whether it be in meditation, whether it be with scripture, whether it be some particular devotions or just in silence, I think are super important. Of course, the sacraments, they're guaranteed avenues of grace for us, to be close to the Lord, that even if we don't always recognize the power they're having in our life at the time, they are working. And God is working within us when we receive them. And so those would just be two of the ways that I would say is make sure you're praying and living a sacramental life as much as you can, striving to grow in virtue. But then also, God can't drive a parked car. Eventually, we got to move.
So we currently have 11 seminarians in formation for the priesthood in the Diocese of Harrisburg. Talk to me about what it looks like to go through seminary, the time commitment, the investment. I've heard it referred a lot to like college or graduate school. Is that a fair assessment? Walk me through what is kind of involved.
There's a lot going into that question for sure. What is it like? For starters, it takes about 7 to 9 years for a man to go through the entire process, the formation, to be ordained a priest. Part of that depends on life experience and how much education he had before applying and entering seminary. So if you don't have a college degree, you're closer to the 9-year kind of deal. And if you do already have one, you're closer to the 7-year part of that. But formation can really be broken down, and they call them the 4 dimensions. The first one being human, which the focus is just helping the individual to grow as a well-formed, human man, and all the things that are required to do that and to do that well, because you have to be, a man in order to be a priest. Then there is the spiritual dimension, which is exactly what it sounds, making sure we're growing ever closer to the Lord, because that's the source of everything that we do. Nothing we do as priests can we do on our own. We do because of our connection to Jesus Christ himself. So developing that relationship and that bond with him. Then we have, of course, the academic one, where you do, if you go without a college degree, you do get your bachelor's in philosophy. You also, have the master's degree program as well after that everyone goes through in theology. So there's an academic portion to that as well. And then there's the pastoral dimension, which is all about self-gift and service to the community. And so in each of those categories, there's a focus, and you actually have an advisor in each of those categories. So you have someone that you talk to about your academics, you have your spiritual director, you have someone that's keeping an eye on you to make sure you're integrating into the community well and that you're growing. And then you have a supervisor who is with you when you're doing your service in the community. And so what might a day look like? It depends on the day, and it varies seminary to seminary, but generally you may have your holy hour early in the morning, maybe around 7 o'clock. You have morning prayer as a community, followed by mass. And then let's say 8:30, 9 o'clock until maybe 3 or 4. That would be your opportunity for class time. It's very similar to a college model, so it's not like you're in class the entire time. You may have an hour, 15-minute class, for example. You may have 2 or 3 or maybe 1. Just kind of depends on your schedule for the day. And then the rest of that time could be discretionary time, could be meeting times, whatever you kind of have in there. Then generally you meet again together for evening prayers, a community, have dinner. And then the evening could be anything from a conference to discretionary time. It just kind of depends. And then depending on the seminary, some seminaries for their community service just dedicate a whole day to it. Like, okay, on this day of the week, you're going to your assignment. Others schedule it based on like around your class schedule. So they intentionally schedule, so you have a large chunk of time, like, okay, this is the day that you go out to whatever you're doing. And so that's generally kind of what it looks like. You are getting a college degree, but the academics isn't the only thing. It's also about growing as an all-around person. And that's really what differentiates seminary formation or religious formation from anything else. It's not just about educating the mind. It's about forming disciples, people who follow Christ with their whole heart.
So this weekend is the Pentecost collection. And as I understand, this is significant for those who are in formation in seminary, as this will help benefit them. Why should someone consider donating to the Pentecost collection this weekend? What is their contribution cover? Are seminarians expected to foot any of the financial commitment themselves?
So donating to the Pentecost collection is essentially an investment in yourself and in the faithful of the Diocese of Harrisburg, because these are the men that are going to be your future priests. They're the ones that are going to be hearing your confessions, baptizing your kids and grandkids. They're going to be the ones, giving First Communion to them. They're going to be the ones celebrating Sunday Mass at your parish, anointing maybe you or your loved ones. They're going to be the ones that are helping to form you and strengthen you to live out the faith and to give you Jesus Christ in this powerful way and in the sacraments and in their witness. So at the end of the day, you're the ones that benefit from it, that your gift and your generosity to the Pentecost collection helps make that happen. I think maybe it was Bishop Gaynor who mentioned, he's like, yeah, college is expensive and we have 11 guys in college right now. Like, that it does take money to educate and to form them, because we actually don't let them work for extra money during their time. We want them dedicating all their time, all their effort to being the best disciples and the best future priests that they can be. And so your generosity helps make that happen. They're taking 7 to 9 years away from the world to focus on growing there so that they can be sent out. Jesus would retreat up the mountain to pray, to be in communion with his Father, and then he would go out and do ministry. This is their initial time away to prepare, to be strengthened, just like Jesus did in the desert, right? And then to go out and serve the rest of their life as faithful priests to serve you. Probably should have said they don't work for pay. They better be working. But yeah, so there are some financial commitments. So anything from car to cell phone, and meals out, or some groceries and stuff like that, that would be on them. The seminaries do have meal plans, so it's not like they have to pay for everything themselves, but they do have some funds that rather, like, some things are covered for them, like tuition, depending on where you're at in formation, could be covered. But some of the transportation, the cell phone, and the meals and stuff, that is on them to cover. So they do have some costs as well. So your generosity also helps, with that, because it doesn't go for them to pay for discretionary things, but in order to, they don't have to pay for stuff like tuition when they're not allowed to work a full-time job to pay for it. Allows them to just focus on more of the minor stuff and to focus on growing and being the priest that they've been called to be.
So I want to go back to something you said earlier about those who are in the process of discerning. What resources are available especially for young men who are discerning the call to the priesthood?
So we have plenty of things. For starters, I think there's nothing better than, and I already said it before, but the Quo Vadis Days retreat is awesome. Like I said, it's about 4 or 5 days away from the world at Mount St. Mary's Seminary, and you just get to take that time to, first of all, meet other young men like yourself who take their faith seriously and want to grow. And while you're there, you get to meet a lot of different priests of our diocese, which many of the guys never get to do. They know their parish priest or maybe the priest in their area, but the priest is an hour or so away. They've maybe never met them, but they get to see men that they've never seen before and get to interact and connect with them, as well as the seminarians, those who are actually studying to be priests. And they receive anything from a bunch of talks to a bunch of fun events and just community time just grow in their faith and then grow in a greater awareness of how God speaks in our life so that they can be ready to listen, and then in listening, respond to whatever God is calling them to do. So it's not so much a priestly recruitment camp as it is we're trying to get everybody on Team Jesus, to follow him with their whole heart and allow Jesus to direct them wherever he wants. So I think that's one of the biggest and best things that we do. But we also have, the vocations office. So my full-time job is to meet and direct people who think they might have a vocation or even just inquiring and don't know where to start. So I'm always more than happy to meet, whether it be via phone calls, Zoom, in person, whatever it is. I meet with people all the time, kind of giving them direction, trying to guide them along the right path. And in that, once I get to meet with people and figure out where they are, I have a variety of different materials that I could give someone to help them either on their own or connect them with a spiritual director, for example. All of those things that, we're able to do. But I also know we have an awesome presbyterate. The priests of our diocese are awesome. The most common question I've always gotten from them is, how can I help? And I know that all of our priests are more than happy to share their love of the priesthood with you. And if you were to have questions or even just kind of want some advice on where to go, I'm confident in saying every priest in our diocese will be more than happy to give you their thoughts and their direction and help you in any way that we can. So they're probably our best asset. The priests are our witnesses, and also so joyful and willing to help. So they may be our best resource, to be completely honest.
Father Weaver, thank you so much for your time. This has been an eye-opening experience, and I hope those who are considering a call to the priesthood reach out to you with questions, and I hope that those who maybe this is not their calling, maybe God has something else planned for them, maybe they feel called to donate to the Pentecost collection this weekend. So thank you so much for your time. Yeah,
I guess I would just say it's okay to be afraid if you feel God might be pulling you there to be a priest or to be a religious, but don't let fear dictate your actions.
Thank you so much for listening. Our goal at the Diocese of Harrisburg is to walk with you on your faith journey. So if this episode resonated with you in any way, the easiest way to show your appreciation is by sharing this program with your network or by leaving a review on your listening platform. You can also support us financially by making a donation online at hbgdiocese.org/DAC and clicking the Make a Donation button. Thanks again, and we'll see you at church on Sunday.